back to the Aston MTB channel and the final part of the Norco Shore Park saga. I had a great response from Norco about this bike, which they've gone quite in depth into most of the problems that I had with this bike last year. So I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet and just explain the details of Norco's response. For those of you who don't know, this is the first bike I bought for this channel, and I think the first bike I ever paid full retail price for in my whole life. So a big investment for me to kickstart this independent review channel, which ultimately turned into a massive failure. To be clear from the start, I did not buy this bike so that I could moan, complain, and ultimately give it a very, very negative review. I bought it thinking I can make something super interesting, enjoy it, ride it, and then give it away in a competition to one of you guys and make some money. That didn't happen. My plan was to make an even better version of my Nikolai G1 Ultimate, which I built a couple of years ago, which is my vision of an enduro bike of the future. 210mm travel, front and rear, upside down fork, custom shock, dropper post, wide range gears, O-chain, mullet wheels. It had everything. The only thing that lacked for me on that bike was I prefer a slightly higher pivot and a better axle path. Apart from that, probably one of the best bikes I've ever owned. Then the Norco Shore was launched. I spotted the budget version Shore Park for only €5,189, which looked ideal. Got a tough alloy frame, 190/200mm travel, with a semi-high pivot with an idler wheel to cut out any chain feedback. I thought, great, I can turn this bike into a mullet-wheeled enduro superbike of the future, which solved two things I didn't like about the G1. So I got the credit card out, found a Shore Park in extra large for sale at Bike24, ordered it, nearly €5,200. It turned up really well packed. I made an unboxing video, which you can click the link up here, and you can go and watch the unboxing video. So yeah, unboxed it, checked the ride aligned guide on the Norco website, then we're all ready to go. Previously, when I was working at Pink Bike, I had a Norco Aurum HSP high pivot downhill bike, which had this amazing ride align setup guide. And from what I remember, it worked really well. It was very specific, and it had everything from tyre pressures to clicks of compression to your handlebar height, and also troubleshooting on how to solve different problems that you might have. That was great. The ride aligned guide for this bike wasn't quite as in-depth, but I thought it should be a good start. So then I went to Switzerland to ride it, jumped on the bike in the car park after setting it up, and it didn't feel great. But I jumped on the lift in Flimslax, headed up 1,000 metres to the top of the hill, and I thought, I don't want to change the settings. I'll start with the recommended settings and see how it goes before I influence that myself. So yeah, got to the top of the hill, got to the top of the Never End Trail, which does end, and this is where all the problems started. So if you want to find out about all the problems I had and how I spent 6 months fixing them to ultimately crack the frame and get a full refund, you can go to the Norco Shore playlist, again, link up here. There's lots of videos about the bike, all the problems, all the things we fixed, the tuning we tried to do to it. Lots of content about that, it's all in there. It's probably quite boring and long form, but go and check it out. All the details you need are in there. I did have a few keyboard warriors complaining about these reviews, saying that some of the problems were my fault and I should be a better mechanic, a better reviewer, I should be less negative, all these things. I should have better skills to fix these problems. But I think this email from Norco shows that I was actually correct or on point with most of the problems that I had. So let's get to it. The email from David Cox. He's an engineer at Norco, and he did send me this a few months ago, and I'm only getting to making the video now. So to the email. Hi Paul, Happy New Year. I'm glad you received a refund and are not out of pocket. Well, I am out of pocket because I ordered the bike, got it delivered to the bike shop, drove my camper van to the bike shop, picked it up, drove it home, built it, tested it, fixed it, bought new parts for it, filmed it, bought a lift ticket so I could ride it, etc, etc. I lost months of my life to this bike. Well, at the end of the 6 months, I literally had one good run on the bike, and then we had to strip it down. replace all the original parts and send it back for inspection because the frame was cracked. Anyway, back to the email. As you know, we have been undertaking a thorough investigation into all of the issues you identified in your videos. Cool. He must have been bloody bored watching all those videos. Poor guy. I was hoping to have copies of the technical bulletins to attach and photos of the modified parts, but we are still awaiting off-tool samples and finalising the bulletins. However, I wanted to provide you with an update of the work completed so far, as I know you will be interested. Yes, I will be interested, and hopefully you guys are interested too. We reviewed each of the issues you identified in your videos and have worked through each of these issues in turn, initially recreating them where possible, and then completing a root cause analysis of each issue. From this analysis, we have then developed and tested a containment to the issue for the shore park, and where appropriate, also the shore trail. The shore trail is essentially the same frame with a different build kit. I think they have 3 build options on the shore chassis. These containments will be rolled out into future productions of the shore and also provided as a complimentary upgrade package to any current shore owners. So yeah, this is fantastic. Because of my review and all the problems that I had, customers are now getting improved bikes in the new production runs. If you're a current shore owner, get in touch with Norco, go to their website, use their customer service form, you'll speak to someone directly in Canada and they'll send you out, or hopefully they're going to send you out, an upgrade package for your bike. So your bike's going to get improved for free because of this review. Fantastic. Back to the email. More importantly, for us as an engineering team, we have used this analysis further to develop a resolution to the issue. A change to our engineering processes that is aimed at preventing these issues occurring again on any of our future bikes. These resolutions are being instigated now, and we are confident that these changes will lead to a tangible improvement of our future bikes. We would also like to share with you a brief overview of the containments and also the resolutions that we are instigating to improve our engineering processes. Very good start. I think we can't argue with any of the things that David said so far. Fantastic. So, first problem, bolts coming loose, which was my main issue with the bike. A tech bulletin to dealers and customers will be issued advising that there are some bikes in the supply chain that may not have had thread lock correctly applied. This also notifies them of changes to the torque specifications. As a resolution to this issue, we will only be specifying frame hardware which has pre-applied thread lock. This will ensure that the thread lock can be inspected prior to assembly and reduces the risk of thread lock being missed during assembly and inspection. We have also improved our hardware torque calculation methods and added a sign-off check of these during our new bike ride testing process. Great. I'm just going to interject here to mention this email was sent by David not to be published. I haven't asked if I can publish it, I'm just doing it. So if you're reading this, maybe the English is not absolutely perfect, but this is a personal email. Yeah, some of it doesn't quite make perfect sense, but it's an email. Fine, no problems. Okay, so the bolts coming loose was a main issue with this bike. Going back to the top of the hill in Flims, I did one run that day on a 10-11 minute track, and I had a massive crash. Really beat myself up, hurt my leg, really big dead leg, couldn't walk properly, so gave up for that day. Had a few days off, and then I was in Crans-Montana in Switzerland, where that day I did 6 or 7 runs on 4 to 5 minute long tracks in Crans-Montana. On the last run while I was there, one of the pivot bolts must have fallen out right at the end of the last run of the last trail that I did, because I didn't feel anything strange. But when I got home a few days later, I realised one of the bolts was missing. No big problem, I thought. I contacted the French and Italian distributors, who to this day have still never replied at all to my emails, even though I did do Google Translate into French and Italian and in English. Sent the email, never got a response. I also emailed about 10 shops in the sort of local area who mostly replied, which was good. I think 8 of them replied, but none of them had any spares or could find any spares. In the end, it took 3 months to get a new bolt, which was sent directly from Norco in Canada. So if you're in France or Italy, first of all, don't bother with their distributors. They're clearly useless. But if you do contact Norco website directly, you'll get through to someone in Canada at HQ, and they will bother to reply and try to help. In this case, they sent me the bolt direct from Canada when they arrived. So Norco has fixed, or is fixing, this thread lock bolt issue. When I removed all the bolts from my bike, there was no thread lock anywhere on any of the bolts, nothing. But then, when we received the new bolts, we thread locked everything and torqued them to spec exactly, and then we tested it in Finale, and this is in one of the videos, literally riding a minute down a trail, and the bolts, the same bolts, were starting to come loose again. So even when the bolts were thread locked correctly and torqued correctly, according to Norco's very good technical guide, they were still coming loose. The next ride, we stripped everything down again, we cleaned all the threads, we put way too much Loctite on everywhere, over torqued everything, rode it again, and some of the bolts were still coming loose, while the whole bolt and pivot bolt were rotating in the frame. Also, at some point during this months of arguing with Bike24, who were also speaking to Norco, I was told at one point it was user error if the bolts come loose. And even on some long trails, the bolts should be checked for torque. Yeah, I see people all the time, halfway down a 500,000 metre descent, the side of a beautiful Swiss mountain, having the time of their life, whipping the torque wrench out of the bag and checking the torque on your frame. You should not have to check the torque of the bolts on your bike during a ride. That is just ridiculous. And I think I like Bike24. Bike24 being great. That's the only thing that they've ever said or done I wasn't happy with, telling me it's my fault the bolts are coming loose. Because it's not my fault, it's the bike company's fault.
The problems of the bolts and the chain coming off aren't a warranty problem, and it's my fault really. But we've fixed them by changing the parts, so I think it is the manufacturer's fault for speccing the wrong parts and not adjusting it and tuning it correctly. The bolts are all tight. This one has moved though, again, one run. This one has definitely rotated loads. But yeah, that's an axle with a bolt around it. So the bolt to axle is still tight, but it has rotated around.
So, bolt problem done. Let's move on. Chain falling off, chainring and idler. A lower chain guide will be fitted to the Shore Park, which has been tested and approved to work with all past and future specifications of crankset. A new idler chain guide with anti-rotation details has also been added. Both of these upgrades will shortly be made available to existing customers. The specification of components on all future bikes will be subject to an improved engineering review and sign-off. And during the ride testing process, we will test all specifications of the new bike and confirm that they are fit for the intended purpose of the bike. Great. So this was the second major issue with my bike, the chain falling off. The first day I rode it, and half of the second day I rode it, didn't lose the chain once. But you know, when you get a new chain, it's got that super sticky grease on from the factory, and I think that was helping to stick it on. A few rides later, the chain was coming off literally every 20 metres, and sometimes I'd stop and put it on. Yeah, pedal 20 metres and it would come off. It was driving me absolutely insane. So, great news, the crankset has been upgraded on the Shore Park from the crappy Raceface crankset. It was so crappy, it was not even on the Raceface website. It's just some crankset with a Raceface logo on it as far as I can tell. And it's so old, it's even got tabs on the back to put a granny chainring on. And I think it was ISIS axle. Anyway, cheap, crappy crankset without a narrow, wide chainring. So now Norco have spec'd a narrow, wide chainring, which my bike didn't have a stock. Great. I did change for a narrow, wide during the testing process, which helped. So now the bike has a narrow, wide chainring, a new E13 bash guide with the tension wheel on the bottom of the bash guard. That's great. No mention of upgrading the idler wheel guide, which we also had a problem with. So we weren't just losing the chain from the bottom of the chainring, we were also losing the chain on the idler wheel because it's got a guide, but the guide is much bigger than the chain, and there's plenty of space for the chain to bounce off and go down the side of the idler wheel. So yeah, way too much space around the chain on the idler chain guide. We filled ours with Sugrue to reduce the space to an absolute minimum. So after the Sugrue fix and the narrow wide chainring, we did manage to do a few 100 metres of riding without losing the chain. But no mention from David of the cracked ISCG tab. My bike had a metal bash guard, and at some point a small rock must have flown up from the trail from the front wheel, hit the bash guard, tried to bend the bash guard, which ultimately cracked the frame, which is why we sent the bike back. Now it's been replaced with a plastic bash guard, which could possibly distribute some of that force more and stop it going into the frame and cracking the frame. And again, like all these videos, I'm not a bike engineer, I'm not an engineer, I'm just buying bikes, testing them, trying to review them, asking for other people's advice. In this case, I posted a picture of the crack on Instagram and had 3 people who are bike manufacturers and bike builders themselves contacted me and said the problem is there's just not enough weld around that ISCG tab, that's why it's cracked. So yeah, I'm not an engineer, but 3 other bike engineers said the problem is not enough weld. Hopefully that has been improved in the bike also. Okay, back to the email. Damage to the seat stay from chain. We have added clearer notes in the user manual detailing the positioning of the SS protector, seat stay protector. For the future, we are looking to have all frame protection fitted during production so that we can ensure it is not missed from the assembly by the customer or shop as it appears occurred with your bike. This would also mean that the accuracy of the positioning can be improved through jigging and inspected. This is great. It's bloody frustrating in 2021, now 2022, when you spend €5,000 on a bike and the first time you ride it, the chain is just rattling off the frame and chipping off the paint. This should not be happening anymore. Hopefully this is going to solve it. Next, the setup guide. Remember the crash I had on the first day? This is related to the setup guide. Back to David's email. We have updated the ride-aligned setup guide for Shore Park to list the correct 50mm stem length that is on spec. The stem spacer note has been updated to provide clarity on spacer size and top crown and under the stem. There is now an additional note in the fork setup section with information to properly set fork height. So when I first punched my details into the ride-aligned guide, it recommended a 40mm stem for me, but it came with a 50, which if I wanted to get the perfect setup on their guide from day one, I'd have to go and buy another stem. 50, €100, time, blah blah blah. That's not great in my mind. And also the guide wasn't clear on the fork crown stem spacers, fork crown spacers and the stanchion height. So it gave some spacer numbers, but it wasn't really clear how it should exactly be set up. And they've upgraded that. You can go on the ride line guide now and it's got much more detail. Fantastic. The process for checking and approving these guides has been improved with an improved checklist and cross-check between the engineers. Nice. The fork setup note now also lists the stock number of tokens installed in the fork. It should be noted that in the case of the Shore Park, the fork comes stock with no tokens installed, but our ride-aligned setup guide recommends 2 tokens. We recognise customers may assume that the fork comes with a ride-aligned recommended number of tokens, and previously the setup guide did not highlight instances where the customer would need to install or remove tokens. We are working with our suspension suppliers to spec the ride-aligned recommended number of tokens in forks on future bikes. Great. We have also updated the recommended fork pressures and rear shock spring rates to reflect our current methodology for calculating these parameters based on rider weight and skill level. Additionally, recommended coil spring rates are now rounded to both the nearest £50 and £5. The purpose for this update is to provide customers a more accurate rate relative to their body weight and skill level if they choose to install an adjustable weight spring like a Sprindex. Great, so back to the crash. Day one, I started with the stock settings, top of the mountain in Switzerland, 1,000 metres descent in front of me. I rode like 100 metres. I was like, this is unrideable. Fork's way too soft, back end's way too stiff, pitching forward, horrible. And I stopped and I put like, I can't remember now, 15 more PSI in the fork. Went like another 100 metres, put another 15 PSI in, still too soft. But then carried on riding. So the crash, if anybody wants to call me out and say it's rider error, that's fine. But I think I've got a pretty good handle on bike setup and how a bike should be set up. So I think this Boxer Select is just way too soft. even if you've pumped too much air pressure into it. And the support from the damping side just seems non-existent. You can wind it up and then it just becomes really harsh and destroys your hands. So that Boxer Select, sorry, sucks. My other issue here is that Norco recommend a spring rate for the fork and the shock, but no sag number. And I spoke to them previously before this happened, trying to work out what the sag number should be. Norco explained they don't mention a sag number because people can mess up measuring the sag in various different ways, and there's different ways to do it, which is fair. But I had 17% sag at the shock with their recommendations, where the general rule for mountain bike suspension is 30% sag at the wheel, which in this bike is 27 or 28% sag at the shock. So the guide now recommends, for my weight and my riding style, a softer spring and a higher fork pressure, which is going to change the balance of the bike backwards. Now, rider error, the crash wasn't my fault. I crashed after I put loads more pressure in the fork, and I crashed riding along a straight line, hitting some rocks, hit a big hole, bottomed out the fork, over the bars, into a pile of logs and a massive ant's nest. Could have been a lot worse, could have been much worse. Luckily I just had a big dead leg and was beaten up with some bruises, but could have easily broke a bone. So yeah, rider error or bike setup error. I haven't gone over the bars on any bike in the last year apart from that one. Probably going to regret saying that, touch wood, touch wood. So rider error or the bike set up incorrectly, you decide. Back to the email. There are some other issues that you highlighted that we are still working through and do not yet have a resolution to share with you, including the seat tube, internal finish quality and parts availability, and customer support advice. However, these issues are still on our issue tracker and we will continue to work on ways to improve these too. Fantastic. Although your testing of the shore did not result in an outcome that either of us expected, I would still like to thank you for the time you invested in independently testing the shore, and I'm more than confident that your next Norco experience will be considerably more positive. I do like you, David, but there's probably not going to be another Norco experience in the future. We'll see.
Can you not thank you financially?
Can they not thank me financially? Well, in some of my posts I did mention, if anybody from Norco wants to thank me for all this production prototyping work I've done for them, go to my coffee page, go to my LinkedIn page, go and buy some tickets. Didn't see anybody from Norco or any thanks from Norco there, but whatever.
Because that is someone's job within each company to go and test these, do exactly what you've done.
Yeah, and those people are getting paid. I'm getting paid nothing.
Yeah.
I'm paying myself. I'm just losing loads of money.
No, you're not out of pocket. You got a refund.
Oh yeah, I got a refund. Only wasted 6 months of my life. Right.
You can get a refund on that.
So, thanks David and Norco. It is great that I did have lots of problems, but at least they are putting a lot of effort in to try and solve them. Fantastic. But I did still end up out of pocket and essentially did lots of the research, development, prototype testing for them, which is a lot of work really. I also, in his last point, he mentioned the reamed seat tube. I did buy a brand new bike yoke dropper, which I think was €460. Put it into the seat tube and it scratched the dropper. Brand new dropper post, all scratched. And I used it for like 2 runs because the bike didn't work. Now it's sat in a box downstairs. Oh man, yeah. And yeah, I also spent hours, wasted time, making videos, all that stuff for nothing. If it was a good bike that I could have given away in the competition, I would have hopefully made some money from the competition. I got nothing out of this. So yeah, try not to get too negative. We're moving on. I think my main thought about this bike and all the problems I had is a lot of them would have been avoided by proper testing and prototyping. Of course, these brands do test these products, but they normally get a mule pre-production from the factory sample, and they're also getting all the next year's parts sent to the product managers, so the product managers can test them, see if they fit the bikes, see if they suit the spec that they want to build. But if I was a product manager, and I think this is what happens, I'm not riding those crappy race face cranks. I'm going to take the best parts from all the parts that have just turned up from SRAM or RockShox. I'm going to be using all the best stuff, and I think, and Norco can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think the product managers and the test riders are riding the best, nicest, most interesting stuff. And the cheaper models, they simply get chosen to spec for the lower range bikes, and the spec just comes down to availability, order quantities, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think in this case, that Shore Park, the cheap budget model, was probably never tested in the exact specification, because they would have instantly found in a couple of rides the chain falls off. If they're riding with a higher spec bike with the narrow wide chainring, they wouldn't have that problem. But it's great to see. So I've done this review, had loads of problems, I keep moaning about it, but essentially, after all that, Norco have improved their bikes for the customers, which is the whole goal of this channel. Hashtag build bike better. We want to make the bikes better. I want the bikes to be more simple, more reliable, safer, handle better, cheaper, all those things. And this is a case. People are going to get better bikes because of the review. Fantastic. So that's it. That's the best I could do with a Norco Shore. Completely independent review of the bike. I paid full price for it. Went through all the problems. Fixed all the problems myself. Spoke to Norco about them. Or Norco watched my videos. Norco have then instigated solutions to all the problems that I had, so you guys don't have to have them. Anyone that's already got a Shore can now get new parts. Get in touch with Norco, you'll get sent new parts. So if you like it, if you like what I'm doing, if you like the other interesting stuff we're doing at the bike park, yeah, subscribe, tell your friends, go and make a donation, links below through Coffee or Linktree, or head to my competition site, buy some tickets for, I'm not sure what's online at the moment when you're watching this video. Go and buy some tickets, win some cool stuff, support the channel, build bike better. See you soon. Thank you.